We've seen Luffy using his fists to solve most of the problems he encounters. But what if, instead of using his fists, he used a sword? How would Luffy, as a swordsman, change the entirety of the One Piece story? Well, to start, we rewind to Luffy's childhood, where we see him interacting with Shanks, his idol. Being a free spirit, Luffy always loved Shanks' stories and wanted to be more like him. His grandfather, on the other hand, had always wanted Luffy to be a marine, so Luffy ended up picking a middle ground. Due to his grandfather's influence, Luffy agreed to train to be a marine, but since his idol was a swordsman, Luffy chose to train himself in the way of the sword. Other than the occasional pointers from Shanks, Luffy spent most of his childhood playing around with his brothers and the sword Shanks gave him. Around the time at the bar, Luffy was about to take a bite out of the devil fruit Shanks had stolen from the Marines, but Shanks caught Luffy just in time and stopped him. As a consolation prize, Shanks gave him a neat sword, which was a bit too big for him to carry. Considering this was a gift from someone he admired, Luffy paid no heed to the size and began training with it all the time, while Garp drilled all his strength training into Luffy. His dream is to become the strongest swordsman in the world! Years pass, and Luffy grows into a fine young man with a lean, muscular frame and a good amount of training in the art of the sword. He is then told to travel to Shellstown as a sort of test before he enlists in the Marines. On the way, Luffy's boat breaks down because our lad may plan on being a Marine, but he has the hand-eye coordination of a monkey. Luffy soon ends up on Alvida's pirate ship after floating in a barrel. There he meets Kobe, a timid boy who is being forced to work under Alvida. Luffy makes short work of the pirate with his swordsmanship, which inspires Kobe to join the Marines. After defeating Alvida, Luffy and Kobe set off towards the nearest Marine base, which happens to be in Shellstown. Upon reaching Shellstown, Kobe and Luffy head to the Marine base. On the way, they learn about the bounty hunter, Roronoa Zoro, as well as the rumors about Axe Hand Morgan. Luffy is super excited about the prospect of fighting against Roronoa Zoro since he too practices the way of the sword. Luffy heads on toward the Marine base with Kobe, but ends up getting into a spat with Helmeppo. He further finds out about the tyranny of Morgan and takes it upon himself to defeat him, bent on being a real Marine. Realizing that he may need some help, Luffy enlists Zoro as a temporary ally. The two swordsmen end up defeating Morgan, which causes his men to rejoice. Morgan is then detained in the very base he commanded while one of his former lieutenants takes charge. With that behind him, Luffy proceeds to challenge Zoro to a duel to test his strength and swordsmanship. The two seem to be almost evenly matched, but in the end, the match is cut short as Zoro has to eventually escape from the Marine base due to hearing about the arrival of Garp. After clashing their swords, the two develop a sort of kinship and rivalry as both of them realize that they have the same goal and would one day end up having to fight for the title of the world's greatest swordsman. With a new rival to compete with, Zoro's ambition blazes, and he enlists in the Marines along with Kobe and even Helmeppo. Seeing his grandson finally having joined the Marines, Garp takes him directly under his wing again. But instead of the brutal training Luffy had to go through since childhood, Garp opts to train Luffy by sending him on increasingly dangerous missions. Luffy's first mission is to head to Orangetown to deal with Buggy the Clown. Upon arriving in Orangetown, Luffy meets Nami, who is stealing from Buggy's crew, leading to their capture. Buggy imprisons Luffy in a cage, but with Nami's help, he escapes. During their battle, Buggy uses his Chop Chop fruit abilities to separate and control his body parts, making Luffy's swordsmanship all but useless. However, Nami ties up Buggy's body parts with rope, limiting his mobility, and Luffy discovers that Buggy's feet must stay on the ground for him to control his floating body parts. Exploiting this weakness, Luffy strategically attacks Buggy and ultimately uses his Garp-infused strength to launch Buggy into the air, scattering his body parts and defeating him. With Buggy vanquished, his crew disbands and flees, and Nami decides to join Luffy for a bit in the hopes of stealing more treasure directly from the Marines. Having accomplished his mission, Luffy heads back to base with Nami, who basically shadows Luffy for a bit, saying she'll think about possibly joining the Marines alongside him. As soon as Luffy arrives, Garp sends him on another mission, all the way to Syrup Village, as someone has tipped the Marines off that a certain nefarious pirate is hiding out there. While on the search for clues, Luffy and Nami encounter Usopp, a local boy known for his tall tales and his habit of shouting false alarms about pirate attacks. Usopp is inspired by his father's legacy, Yasopp, who is a pirate in Shanks' crew, and he dreams of becoming a brave warrior of the sea. Luffy shares his experiences with Shanks, and they too end up bonding over it. The gang soon discovers that the pirate Kuro was posing as the butler of Kaya, Usopp's friend. They end up fighting against the Black Cat pirates, but it looks like Luffy's training is a step ahead as the three end up defeating the pirates. Seeing Luffy in action, Usopp is inspired to follow him and join the Marines. Once the gang heads back, Usopp officially enlists in the Marines. While Usopp is sent to another unit to commence training, Luffy is given a bit of a reprieve for the first time as Garp takes him to Barity, the renowned floating restaurant, for some awesome food. The grandfather and grandson duo end up ordering a vast amount of food and pigging out in the restaurant. Here they also encounter Sanji, the passionate and skilled assistant chef who dreams of finding the All Blue, a legendary sea where all fish from the world's oceans converge. The arc takes a dramatic turn with the arrival of Don Krieg, a fearsome pirate seeking refuge and food after being defeated in the treacherous Grand Line. Sanji, embodying his compassionate nature, feeds the starving Krieg and his crew, only to be betrayed when Krieg attempts attempts to seize control of the Baratie. Garp considers this a good way to test Luffy and tasks him with taking care of the pirate as he casually takes out numerous members of Don Krieg's crew to even out the playing field. Realizing that Luffy and the Baratie staff are a force to be reckoned with, especially with Garp on their side, Don Krieg ultimately tries to escape. His attempts are thwarted as Garp busts his entire ship and takes him into custody. Not long after, Dracula Mihawk arrives on the scene. Seeing his goal right in front of him, Luffy couldn't resist the chance to test his mettle against such a renowned figure. Considering that Mihawk was unofficially part of the Marines, he decided to humor the young Marine standing in front of him and chose to fight Luffy with a really tiny blade, the smallest one he had. The duel was swift and intense. Mihawk, with his mastery of the sword and formidable powers, effortlessly outclassed Luffy. Yet despite facing such overwhelming strength, Luffy fought with all his might, driven by his unyielding resolve. Each clash of steel echoed Luffy's unwavering determination to push beyond his limits, to see just how far he could go. In the end, Luffy was defeated, but not without leaving a lasting impression. Mihawk, recognizing Luffy's unbreakable spirit, acknowledged him with a nod of respect. The duel showed Luffy how far he would have to go to achieve his dream and the obstacles he would have to surpass. So he returned to his training with increased vigor after leaving the Baratie. In a chance encounter, Luffy and Nami overheard Captain Nezumi talking about the Konomi Islands. The Marine captain was talking about how everything was fine over there, which drove Nami into a silent rage. Luffy saw Nami's emotions on her face, and she soon told him about the atrocities Arlong was committing in the place she used to call home. Seeing the tyranny and unable to swallow it, Luffy ended up going with Nami on a self-imposed mission to free the area from the villain's influence. Their initial encounter with Arlong is less than ideal, as the foe proves to be too much for Luffy to handle. Somehow, the two end up escaping certain death and make a call to Garp, requesting his help after Luffy explains the situation to him. Seeing that the foe may be too much for Luffy to handle alone, Garp arrives with reinforcements and puts a stop to Arlong's tyranny before he can devastate the village further. Seeing how far Luffy went and how the Marines helped her get her town back, Nami decides to enlist as well, and Garp takes her under his wing. Nezumi is also put behind bars for failing to report the true situation in Konomi. Luffy continues his training along with Nami while being sent on numerous less deadly missions. During his time at Town, he gets to meet Smoker and Tashigi. Seeing that she is a fellow swordsman, Luffy spends some time polishing his techniques. Smoker, on the other hand, doesn't pay Luffy much heed except for the occasional sparring match. It's at this point that Luffy realizes how tough it would be to handle a Logia user. Prior to this, Garp had also taken Kobe and Helmeppo under his wing after seeing their potential, and proceeded to dish out some hellish training to them. Luffy was made to revisit his childhood days, and Garp made him join the two as well. As the gang's days continue, they eventually hear the news that Crocodile, a member of the 7 Warlords of the Sea, has mostly bombed and devastated Alabasta. Hearing this news caused Luffy to reel back. His thoughts were clouded with anger upon hearing that so many people must have lost their lives. The event caused him to harbor anger even towards the Marines, who did nothing to stop the warlord, and since it was the government itself that let him reign freely over a nation that he later destroyed. The Marines did make an attempt at capturing the warlord after his deeds were brought to light, but Crocodile and his Baroque works had already fled the scene. Once Luffy, Kobe, Helmeppo, and Nami got a bit stronger, Garp begins training them to use Rokushiki, the superhuman martial arts style. More time passes with the gang getting stronger when news arrives that Ace has been captured. Luffy's brother hadn't gone with Garp's plan of becoming a Marine and had instead set sail as a pirate. He was known as Fire Fist Ace due to his devil fruit, the Mera Mera no Mi, which was a Logia type that granted Ace the power of flames. He eventually joined the Whitebeard Pirates, one of the strongest pirate crews under the Emperor of the Sea, Whitebeard. It seems that an ex-member of the Whitebeard Pirates, Blackbeard, was the one who captured Ace and handed him over to the Marines. Luffy learned that Ace was being held at Impel Down and was due to be executed, since he was also the son of the famous pirate king, Gol D. Roger. This reveal sent Luffy into a spiral as he no longer knew what to do. On one hand, he was bound by his duty to the Marines and the principle of justice, which demanded the execution of Ace, viewed by the world government as a dangerous pirate due to his lineage as the son of the former pirate king. On the other hand, Ace was Luffy's brother, whom he loved dearly. Luffy's love for his family clashed violently with his Marine duties, causing him immense emotional pain. Would he have to lose Ace like he lost Sabo? The emotions were too much for Luffy to bear. At the same time, Garp too felt the burden of this turmoil, which became even greater due to his status as a vice admiral. Luffy chose to focus on his training to avoid thinking about the topic for as long as he could, spending his days with Kobe and the rest, who were equally worried about what to do. Hence, they witnessed Luffy in so much despair. Even Usopp, who frequently visited Luffy's unit, wasn't sure what to do about the entire predicament. Garp soon came with orders for Luffy and his unit to participate in the war against Whitebeard. The world government decided to publicly execute Ace to send a strong message to all pirates, demonstrating their power and commitment to eradicating piracy. The execution was planned to take place at Marine Headquarters, Marineford. The Marines knew that Whitebeard would not stand still and would come to Ace's rescue in full force, so they intended to deal with one of the most powerful forces in the sea, along with the execution of Goldie Roger's only son. Luffy clenched his fist upon hearing this, but said nothing, choosing to keep himself blinded so he could avoid thinking about what was going on. Days passed, and the battle at Marineford was set to take place. As the execution date approached, the Marines amassed their full strength at Marineford, their headquarters. Led by Fleet Admiral Sengoku, the Marines prepared meticulously, gathering their top officers, including the formidable Admirals Sakazuki, Kuzan, and Kizaru. Vice Admirals like the legendary Monkey D. Garp, Smoker, Hina, and others also took their places. Additionally, the Shichibukai, or Warlords of the Sea, were summoned to support the Marines. These included powerful figures like Dracula Mihawk, Boa Hancock, Bartholomew Kuma, Don Quixote Doflamingo, Gecko Moria, and the newest member Blackbeard, who was granted the position after handing over Ace to the Marines. On the day of the execution, as expected by the Marines, Whitebeard arrived. Using a clever strategy, Whitebeard's fleet of ships, including his flagship, the Moby Dick, approached Marineford underwater with coded ships to avoid detection. In a stunning entrance, the Moby Dick surfaced within the Bay of Marineford, catching the Marines off guard. Whitebeard himself, a towering figure with the power of the Gura Gura Nomi, confronted the Marines head-on, unleashing devastating shockwaves that rocked the battlefield. The war began in full force as Whitebeard's commanders, Marco the Phoenix, Jozu, and Vista, along with the rest, clashed with the Marines. Luffy stood on the sidelines, but his inner turmoil grew increasingly haunting as he saw his brother's impending demise. Nami, Usopp, Kobe, and Helmeppo were close to him during the war and were unsure of what to do. Luffy was faced with flashbacks of his childhood, memories of his time spent with his brothers, and how he lost Saabo. His emotions soon became overbearing just as he realized that Ace was about to be executed. Luffy screamed as his conqueror's haki rushed through the battlefield. The Marines who were about to execute Ace were caught in it and proceeded to faint. The moment shocked both the admirals and pirates alike, as the power was the rarest among haki users. Luffy's emotions burst out as he used Soru to head towards the execution platform. The confusion allowed Luffy to head for his brother as he decided to rescue Ace, despite his duties. Garp realized what Luffy was doing, causing them to clash. Garp's own emotions towards his grandson caused him to falter, and Luffy blew Garp off the execution platform. Luffy cut Ace's shackles, much to his shock, and the two shared a brief emotional reunion. Meanwhile, Kobe, Helmeppo, Nami, and Usopp saw that Luffy had chosen to defect and were quick to swap their allegiances from the Marines, opting to go after Luffy and help him escape. The Whitebeard pirates saw the same and drove to make their way back to their ship for Luffy. Admiral Sengoku used his devil fruit to transform into a large Buddha and smashed the scaffolding as the Marines turned their attention toward Luffy. But with Ace free, he made use of his powers to protect his brother, and the two rushed toward the Whitebeard pirates. Seeing his son free, Whitebeard used the power of his quakes to break up Marineford, causing even the sea to split. Marineford began to crumble around the Marines. With the island coming down, much of Whitebeard's crew didn't want to leave their captain behind, who had ordered them to retreat. Whitebeard had a brief reunion with his son before he made way for him and Luffy to escape, with Kobe and the gang in tow. Sakazuki saw that escape was imminent and chose to taunt Ace, calling Whitebeard a washed-up failure. Ace was unable to stomach the words and confronted Sakazuki. Luffy intervened as well, and during a moment of weakness, Luffy was targeted by Sakazuki, who came at him with the full force of his magma. But Ace shielded his brother, taking the blow in his place. The next few moments were but a flash in Luffy's mind as he held his dying brother. Marco and Vista arrived to hold back Sakazuki. Luffy's friends showed up as he had a complete breakdown. Whitebeard went after Sakazuki in a rage and defeated him after sustaining massive damage. The Blackbeard pirates suddenly appeared and were the ones to end Whitebeard's life and steal his devil fruit. Luffy was being dragged to a ship when Sakazuki chased after him, only for Luffy to be saved by the appearance of Shanks. Shanks' arrival caused the war to end, as even the Marines would not want to face another emperor straight after Whitebeard. Shanks took Luffy and his friends with him to his ship, with Luffy in too much of a state of shock to even recognize his idol. As Shanks' doctors gave Luffy the medical aid he needed, Shanks set course for Kuraigana Island. Meanwhile, Usopp had a reunion with his father, Yasopp. The reunion was awkward as the two weren't in the mental state or position to have a heart-to-heart yet. Usopp still believed that he needed to prove himself, and his worry over Luffy was currently the first thing on his mind. The red-haired pirates arrived at Kuraigana, where Shanks met with his sparring partner, none other than the renowned Dracula Mihawk. Shanks asked him to take care of Luffy and train him, as he would need someone to guide the young boy now that he had nowhere to go. Mihawk reluctantly accepted, and Luffy was sent to his castle as his condition stabilized. The rest of the gang realized they were now dissenters and would be wanted criminals by the Marines. Considering how everything played out, Usopp suggested that they get a ship since they would need a means of transport to traverse the seas now that they were on their own. Kobe stayed behind on Kurigana Island, while the rest of the gang was accompanied by the red-haired pirates as they decided to head back to Syrup Village. Shanks told the gang to train train for the remainder of the time as he wanted Luffy to become stronger in the next 2 years. He believed that no matter what path the friends chose to travel, they would need significant strength to challenge the world and the Marines, who would no doubt be on their trail. The next 2 years passed as Luffy focused on his training with Mihawk, while Kobe continued to train against the human drills inhabiting the island. During this time, Luffy decided that he would no longer forgive the Marines for the loss he went through. Usopp and the rest of the gang arrived after the time skip on a new ship named the Going Merry. Kaya gifted the ship to Usopp after he returned to Syrup Village, before he furthered his training from his days in the Marines and improved his sniping skills. With the gang all together, Mihawk told Luffy that Ace's devil fruit was rumored to be on the island of Dressrosa. Deciding that he wanted to have a part of Ace's legacy, Luffy and the gang made their way to the island. Upon arriving at Dressrosa, Luffy and his party learned about a tournament due to take place at the Corrida Coliseum, organized by the warlord Don Quixote do Flamingo. The prize was the Mera Mera no Mei fruit, previously eaten by Luffy's late brother Ace. Determined to honor Ace's memory, Luffy entered the tournament. The tournament included fights with numerous characters and was divided into several blocks with great battles. The pivotal moment came when Luffy's brother Sabo arrived. It was an extremely emotional moment as memories of their shared childhood flooded back. The brothers embraced tightly, their bond rekindled after years of separation. Sabo explained how he had survived the attack by the Celestial Dragon years ago and had been taken in by Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army. He had lost his memory until recently, which explained his absence. The reunion was bittersweet as they both remembered Ace and the pain of his loss, but it was also a moment of hope and renewal. Sabo's return gave Luffy a new sense of strength and resolve. By this time, Luffy had also learned of the tyranny of Doflamingo, and he and his friends decided to put a stop to it. Luffy also learned that Sabo was rescued by Monkey D. Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army and Luffy's father. Due to the traumatic incident, Sabo lost his memory, including his memories of Luffy and Ace. He was taken in and cared for by the revolutionaries, and over time, he rose through their ranks, becoming the chief of staff, second only to Dragon. At the moment, Sabo agreed to help Luffy acquire the Mera Mera no Mi. The tournament continued, and with Sabo's help, Luffy was able to acquire Ace's devil fruit. Luffy wasted no time in consuming it and immediately gained the abilities associated with the fruit. Luffy was enveloped in flames as his body became the embodiment of fire. His newfound Logia abilities, coupled with his swordsmanship, boosted Luffy's power to an unforeseen level. The gang eventually faced off against Doflamingo, and with Sabo's help, they were able to take down the tyrant and retrieve his cache of weapons. After liberating Dressrosa, Sabo asked Luffy if he wanted to join the Revolutionary Army. With no place to go and his rage towards the Marines, Luffy opted to join along with all of his friends, and they traveled to the Revolutionary Army's base. On the way, Luffy learned that the Revolutionary Army's ultimate goal was to topple the oppressive world government and reshape the world order. Central to their ideology was the pursuit of freedom and equality for all, aiming to liberate nations and islands from the grip of corruption and tyranny perpetuated by the world nobles. After arriving at the base on Baltigo, Luffy had a reunion with his father, who seemed to act quite coldly towards him, keeping the reunion short and treating him more like a new member. Luffy wasn't fazed by this, as he never had his father during his childhood and didn't harbor any feelings towards the man. Luffy also met Nico Robin here, a survivor of the Ohara incident. It seemed she was saved by the Revolutionary Army and opted to join them. Luffy spent his time learning more about his Logia powers and continuing to polish his swordsmanship. He spent half the time sparring with the revolutionaries and half of it learning more about his flame fruit. Luffy also learned more about Roronoa Zoro, who seemed to have been going around the seas, fighting against pirates and collecting bounties all over. Nico Robin was told to join Luffy's unit, and the gang was tasked with gaining more information about the road poneglyphs. Soon after, Baltigo was attacked by the Blackbeard pirates after Jesus Burgess, a former inmate of Impel Down, discovered the revolutionary base. Luckily, the Revolutionary Army escaped the destruction of Baltigo and moved their base of operations to Momoro Island. Sabo was later sent to infiltrate Mary Joaz along with Karasu, Lindbergh, and Morley to begin their plan to declare war on the world government. During this time, the revolutionaries also learned that the Germa Kingdom and the Big Mom pirates were about to form an alliance through the marriage of the Germa Kingdom prince, Sanji Vinsmoke, and Charlotte Pudding, Big Mom's daughter. Luffy and his team were tasked with infiltrating Whole Cake Island and seeing if they could gain more knowledge from the event. By this time, everyone had considerably increased their strength, with Kobe turning into the likeness of Garp with his formidable power. The group was well-rounded, and they had no issues infiltrating the event. Luffy was also excited to see the former chef, who he had a high opinion of after the events at the Barati. The gang heads over to Whole Cake Island, where they end up getting involved a bit too deeply after Luffy realizes that Sanji is being used as a pawn. Luffy and the gang have to fight against multiple members after Luffy breaks their covert operation and ends up rescuing Sanji from the entire ordeal. Luffy's toughest battle by far is the fight with Katakuri, the top commander of the Big Mom pirates. Luffy somehow manages to defeat the commander by utilizing his armament haki to increase the effectiveness of his sword. The gang is also able to steal a copy of the road poneglyph from under Big Mom's nose. After making a narrow escape, Sanji joins the Revolutionary Army as well. In parallel, Marine Admiral Fujitora leads a campaign to abolish the 7 warlord system and achieves his goal during the leveling. While Saabo and the rest are busy there, Luffy and his gang are tasked with going to Amazon Lily to ally with Boa Hancock, who is now under threat from the Marines due to the abolishment of the warlord system. The gang reaches Amazon Lily right when the Marines arrive to capture Boa along with their new weapons, the Seraphim. The Blackbeard pirates also arrive to obtain Boa's devil fruit. Boa Hancock uses the powers of the Mero Mero no Mi to effectively petrify most of the combatants, including Katarina Devon, Vasco Shot, and most of our heroes except for Luffy, Kobe, and Teach. Teach grabs Boa by the neck, but Luffy intervenes. A battle between the two ensues, much like when Ace fought Blackbeard back when he was captured. The only advantage Luffy has is his impeccable swordsmanship. Luffy fights to defend Boa, but before things can get excessively messy, Silver's Rayleigh arrives to put a stop to the chaos. Seeing the former first mate of the Pirate King, Blackbeard opts to retreat after taking hundreds of Marines hostage. Seeing how Luffy fought for her, Boa agrees to form a temporary alliance with the Revolutionary Army. After returning to the Revolutionary base, Luffy hears about the tyranny going on in Wano country. His nature guides him towards the country where he would face the strongest creature in the world. He would be able to polish his swordsmanship with some of the strongest swordsmen around, and he would be put through more difficult obstacles and odds. Upon arriving at Wano, the first combatant that Luffy stumbles onto is Roronoa Zoro during what seems to be his execution. Fortunately, Zoro quickly dispatches the guards as Luffy gleefully enters the picture. The two rivals face off once more. Luffy notices that Zoro seems a bit more buff and his techniques more refined, much like the swordsman of Wano. Unbeknownst to Luffy, Zoro had stumbled into the country during the time Luffy was training and had soon begun learning the way of the sword from the various hermit swordsmen hiding out in the country. Zoro's swordsmanship had reached a new level by this point, but Luffy wasn't far behind. The two rivals clash among the numerous knocked out swordsmen, and waves of haki rush through the area. After a series of intense blows in which the two size each other up, the fight is stopped midway as more guards appear and the two decide to escape together. We won't decide the victor just yet, as there are bigger fish to fry at the moment. But hey, who knows what else could happen in this crazy adventure? If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and smash the like button for more One Piece videos.